blood dripped slowly from the dog's paw, leaving a dotted trail across the gravel road. Its ribs heaved with shallow breaths, and yet it refused to stop limping forward. Behind it, a man in a weathered jacket and mud-caked boots followed, his steps heavy but sure. He had been on his way back from the edge of town when the animal had staggered into his path, as if it had been waiting for him. The sun was sinking, washing the woods in a molten gold that only made the scene feel more urgent, more impossible to ignore. The man's jaw tightened. Ethan Red did not believe in signs. Years in the service had beaten that kind of magical thinking out of him. But there was something about this dog. The determined way it kept glancing back to make sure he was following, the raw desperation in its dark eyes, that gripped him by the chest. His hand brushed against the old scar that ran like a pale rope across his side, a wound that had nearly ended him years ago. He had learned to trust instincts, and every instinct told him this animal needed him to see something. The dog turned suddenly off the road and slipped between the trees. Ethan swore under his breath but followed, pushing through the underbrush. Branches clawed at his jacket, the smell of pine and wet earth rising as the woods thickened around him. He moved carefully, every sense sharpened. It was the same focus he had felt on patrol overseas, when every step might trigger something deadly. Ethan had come back from war a different man. His chest bore the medal he rarely spoke about, the one pinned on him after the day his unit was ambushed in a dust-choked valley. They said he had saved lives, but all Ethan remembered was the sound of the explosion, the heat against his face, the way he had dragged one of his brothers by the straps of his vest until his legs gave out. He carried that man's last words like a stone in his gut. Coming home had not felt like coming home at all. Just another battlefield, quieter, but with ghosts that walked beside him when no one was looking. The woods grew darker as he pressed on. The dog kept moving, though it was limping badly now, leaving more blood on the forest floor. Ethan's breath came out in white clouds, the air colder under the canopy. And then up ahead he saw it. A cabin tucked between the trees, its windows dark and its roof sagging slightly with age. It looked abandoned, yet the dog stopped at the porch and turned to face him, its tail giving one small, weak wag before it collapsed onto the wooden steps. Ethan knelt, his fingers brushing over the dog's matted fur. He could feel its heart hammering wildly. His gaze lifted to the cabin door, which hung slightly ajar. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He could feel it in the stillness of the place, in the way even the forest sounds seemed to hold their breath. He pushed the door open with the edge of his boot. The smell hit him first. Stale air, damp wood, and something metallic, faint but unmistakable, blood. The room was dim, lit only by the last rays of sun through cracked windows. Dust floated in the beams of light like suspended ash. On the table lay a photograph, its frame cracked. Ethan stepped closer, his pulse quickening. The picture showed three men in uniform, smiling at the camera, arms slung over each other's shoulders. His stomach dropped. He knew those faces. One of them had been with him that day in the valley. The man in the center was the one he had dragged to safety, the one who hadn't made it through the night. Ethan's breath caught. The cabin wasn't empty. A figure moved in the shadows near the far wall, slow and deliberate. Ethan's training snapped into place. He stood straighter, every muscle coiled. The man who stepped into the light looked older, gaunt, but his eyes were unmistakable. It was the brother of the man Ethan had lost. He had seen him once, at the funeral, standing rigid by the graveside. His jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might break. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. The silence was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words. Then the man's voice cracked the stillness. He told Ethan he had been living out here ever since, unable to face the world that had taken his brother. He spoke of the nights he spent replaying every detail, wondering if someone could have done more, wondering why his brother had died and others had lived. Ethan did not interrupt. He stood there, letting the man's pain wash over him, because he had asked himself the same questions 1,000 times. When the words finally broke off, Ethan said quietly that he had been there, that he had not just been there, but had carried his brother's weight on his back until he couldn't feel his own legs. The man's face crumpled. For the first time in years, someone else held the memory of that day, not as a story, but as a wound. Ethan told him how his brother had fought until the end, how his last words had been of home, not of fear. The dog stirred at their feet, letting out a low whine. The man knelt to stroke its head, his shoulders shaking. Ethan realized then that the dog had led him here not by chance, but by some strange, stubborn grace. By the time the moon rose, the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. The man pressed the photograph into Ethan's hands, asking him to keep it safe. As Ethan stepped back outside, he looked down at the dog, now sleeping peacefully despite its wounds. He thought of the men whose names were etched into stone, the ones who would never come home, and of the living who carried them every day. Some debts, he knew, could never be repaid, but some burdens could be shared. When Ethan returned to town at dawn with the injured dog in his arms, the world seemed a little quieter, a little less cruel. The cabin was still back there, standing watch over its grief, but for the first time, it no longer felt forgotten. To everyone who hears this story, remember this. Sometimes the battles that matter most are fought in silence, deep in the woods, where no one is watching. And sometimes, all it takes to begin healing is to follow the one thing in front of you that refuses to give up, even if it's a broken dog leading you home. If you felt this story, share it with someone who carries their own quiet war. Let us know where you are watching from. And never forget that some heroes don't wear uniforms anymore, but they still walk among us.